First question, are parents allowed to curse their children, and will that actually affect the child's life? Where does this idea come from? Go ahead, Sheikh. The question is, can a parent curse their child, and does that curse actually affect their life? Where does this come from?
Well, actually, so I mean, can a parent curse their child? Of course they can. But is that good? Astaghfirullah. No, it's not. It's awful. And as a matter of fact, it's even against the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ, he forbade us from doing that. And he says, he said, لا تدعوا على أنفسكم إلا بخير. Don't you ever make dua against your children. And cursing is part of it as well too. Unless it's khair. He says, Allah, otherwise you might catch and open doors in heaven and will be accepted. So make sure that you don't say anything except for something that is good. And when it comes to cursing anything, even if you curse an animal or a car, the Prophet ﷺ, he somehow had somebody actually cursed a camel that was on the trail with them, and the Prophet ﷺ, he said, that's it, leave it, release it, because we're not gonna go around with this cursed camel. So if that's in animals, can you imagine if parents curse their children? Allah musta'an. And I don't know if parents understand what's the meaning of la'an. The word la'an in the Arabic language has the meaning of at-tardu min rahmatillah, that you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take this child out of His mercy. So if you ask Allah to take your child, boy or girl, out of His mercy, Allah musta'an, can you imagine what is left for them? So absolutely not. You ever say the word la'an, to your children. And if you're gonna have to do something and you're upset with them, then say something good, like Allah yahdik, may Allah guide you, may Allah forgive you. It's not simple and easy for parents to remember a good word when they're upset with their kids. But inshallah, with the consistency, hopefully they will catch that practice, inshallah. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakumullah khair.
The only thing I would add to that, Bismillah, is that, when you have those sort of struggles, figure out a way to release your energy somewhere else. Go outside and yell and scream at the top of your lungs. Do something, punch a punching bag, but don't take it out on your children. Figure out another way to release the energy. Wallahu a'lam.
I'm in my 40s and my mother still wants to control us. It can be as simple as taking a trip with my spouse, which my spouse is okay with, and she will say no. Qiyam at the masjid, she will say no. At what point can we live our own life? At this point, I'm sneaking around so she doesn't get mad.
Bismillah, I want to volunteer. Why me?
You just give the talk.
Okay, are all the questions going to be about parenting?
No, I'll change it.
Okay, thank you. So the question is, if someone is already 40 years old and their mom, does she live with them or not? Because that will change the answer sometimes. Yeah, if she does live with them, that might change the situation. But anyway, when can a child, get out of the control of the parents? Actually, if you're already 40 years old, you're supposed to be out of that control a long time ago. But it's a cultural arrangement sometimes. The problem with this situation is that if you look at the relationship we have with our parents, you're in the middle and you have two circles. You have your spouse circle and you have your parent circle. And they overlap. You're in the middle. So if you think of a Venn diagram, we're going to talk about this tomorrow as well, inshallah. In the Venn diagram, you're in the middle and you have the circle of your parents, or your mom in this case, and the circle of your spouse. So what happens over here is that both mom and wife are kind of competing for territories. Whoever is in the middle is the one who's supposed to control these territories. And usually what happens is that the mom, obviously, she's in that age where she sees that life is kind of like narrowing around her. Her siblings, her relatives, her aunts, they're all now moving on and they're dying, so now we become the elders. And people elderly in that age group, they would like to find a space for themselves. They want to find that there's value for them in the life of other people. And the way they do that is by doing what we call guiding. Like they would like to tell you how experts they are, their expertise in their lives. Hence the problem between the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law. Because the mother-in-law, she's intending to tell her, hey, what I know. And the young lady, of course, she would reject that. So for a person whose mom wants to go with him all the time, instead of trying to make it equal between the love for your mom and the love for your wife, love a mother the way a mother should be loved, and love the wife the way she should be loved. Don't make them equal, which means there are certain territories that belong to the mom. No matter what your wife tries to do about it, it's okay to get her upset, your wife in this case. And there are certain territories for the wife. No matter what your mom tried to take about it, it's okay for her to get upset. And that's why they say, when you deal with people and you make judgments, make decisions in certain ways, someone's going to get upset. No matter what, someone's going to get upset. Therefore, your job is to make sure to upset the right person. That's all. Make sure to upset the right person. If you upset the wrong person, you're in trouble. So therefore, if again, it's a wife's territory, just make that decision for the wife and please the mom in different way that is meaningful to the mother. It doesn't have to be like for example, you take your wife on a dinner, on a date, and your mom just like, where'd you guys go? Why did you tell me? What? I said, okay, where do you want to go, mom? Oh, well, she's not going to make a scene out of it right now, but it's okay. I will take her wherever she wants. Maybe she doesn't want to go out again. Fine, I'll take her, for example, somewhere else. But the idea, it doesn't have to always be equal, but it has to be even. Now.
How,
It's bad for him to sneak out and sneak away when he's already actually married and have his personal life, because that in itself is wrong assumption of his role in his life and her life as well too. You should be doing it without having fear any of backlash from your mother. And if your mom, she's upset that you're taking your wife on a trip or going for Umrah or this and that, that's not of your mom to be upset with that. As long as you fulfill your mom's right, you're okay with that. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair. Why was slavery not prohibited in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
No. Anybody else know? I'm not going to give the answer, but the best answer to this is a book by Dr. Jonathan Brown on slavery. Read that book, and he has a recording for it online. He did a lecture actually a couple of months ago in Dallas. Amazing and beautiful. Read it. It answers more than just a question on the subject of slavery.
And to give a very brief and absolutely read the extended version, but Islam closed up all of the avenues. It diminished all of the avenues for slavery to exist except one, and that one was only through the avenue of war, and that was only as a means of having an equal opportunity if the enemy does the same. In other words, the enemy can't take prisoners of war as slaves, and Muslims can't. So, but Islam closed up all of the avenues. You do something wrong, free a slave. You do something wrong during Ramadan, there are times when that will require you to free a slave. In certain, and just in general, the freeing of a slave is a great virtue. So it closed up all of these avenues. Sayyidina Abu Bakr, he was who he was partly because of the fact that he was so prominent in Mecca in terms of taking care of the needs of the oppressed people, freeing slaves, and so on and so forth. So Islam completely, not completely, but almost completely diminished all of the avenues for slavery to even exist. But it kept that one window open, but even that has a very specific reality to it. So, but that's the short answer of it.
How do you address and acknowledge the embedded racism in masajid where older generations refuse to acknowledge that it's present? And how do you combat microaggression, racist and microaggression in organizations where people don't attend or show disinterest towards those sort of issues?
I'll give it to the younger generation.
Unless you guys on the table. Can you repeat the question?
How do you address and acknowledge the embedded racism in the masajid where older generations refuse to acknowledge that it's present? And kind of a follow-up, how do we combat racism and microaggression in organizations when events are held and talks are held but people don't come or show disinterest towards those sort of topics?
I can speak a little briefly to the first question, and this was something that Sister Rubna was asked earlier during her lecture, but this sort of the divide between our generations. This is something that I found a bit difficult at first when close family members or close, ammos and khalis in the community would make comments using inappropriate words or, microaggressions or whatever it was. And at first I felt extremely uncomfortable, and the initial approach that I would take was, okay, I'm not going to say anything, but I hate it in my heart, right? But I found that over time it was actually very easy and empowering to say, hey, in a very serious manner, like, I understand that you think that's okay, but have you ever thought of it from a different perspective? Hey, like, and sometimes it requires, for a certain personality, requires talking about it in a light tone, a light mood. Oh, like, I have you ever like rethought what you mean by that, and sort of just kind of bringing that to their attention, that do you understand the power of those words? Do you recognize how much damage a word can mean? And so if you start off with certain personalities, you need to be a little, unfortunately you have to be joking at first, but then once you start that conversation, that's when you can sort of push, like, and I've gotten to the point where someone will tell me, will make a comment, I'll say, hey, that's not cool. And when you create that relationship with that person, and you know that you can trust one another, and that they know that you're looking out for them, that it's something they respect. And sometimes they'll laugh at me and be like, Tesneem, you think because you study Islamic studies you can tell us what to do. I get that all the time, right? But it's a start, and it's something, and then you'll notice the next time around they'll be careful around you in terms of using certain terminology, and hopefully that's a change that they make permanently.
What have you noticed is driving youth towards pornography? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. I want to add to the answer regarding to the masajid and institutions. As an imam, actually, what do we do in order to, I would say, eliminate that feeling of racism that exists in our communities? Unfortunately, living in America that long, you realize it's the original sin of this society. Unfortunately, really. SubhanAllah, I grew up in a Muslim culture, in a Muslim land, and I never understood, actually, I never even paid attention to my teachers, the color of his skin, until I came to the US. People keep talking about white, black, and realize, oh my God, SubhanAllah, my teacher was dark skinned. And just like, wow, this is the first time I pay attention to it when I came here. Before that, it wasn't a big deal, wasn't anything to worry about. But you realize in our Muslim communities, it seems to be the larger the community, the more people become more, they start paying attention to this more and more. So, and our divide in the community is not just based on race. This kind of exclusivity comes into race, comes into culture, socioeconomic status, and all that stuff. And you will have some communities, for example, you go to masajid where they say the Syrian masjid, the Egyptian masjid, the Desi masjid. I mean, just like, how are we dividing? How do we call these masajid in that fashion? It seems that the community is so large that people, with certain agenda or certain culture, or certain background, they get together and they establish their own institution or own organization. So how do we combat that in our masajid? As an imam, I make sure as much as possible to do awareness and cultural sensitivity in our community. So as an imam, when I speak different words that speaks with people from different backgrounds, different culture. When you give examples that are appropriate to people from different cultures as well. So when you say this on the minbar, I'm not always mentioning Arabian examples or Desi examples. You just diversify even the examples you bring into your discussions. It makes people more aware of these differences. That's one thing we do. So the other thing also we have, alhamdulillah, when we have our teams, we make sure the team is very diverse as well too. And if we try our best as the community grows bigger, we start creating smaller groups and social gatherings. We try our best to diversify these social gatherings too. Speaking about even these kind of issues of the community openly, we're not shy from bringing these issues up as well too. Even the generation gap, for example, we speak about that publicly. The idea is that we need to talk and tackle these issues instead of just keep it hush hush and move on. Our masajid, and unfortunately our masajid has a lot of history of racism, but they don't pay attention to it. And requires strong leadership really to combat that. Now, one last thing I want to mention regard to this issue, inshallah ta'ala, is when it comes to specifically the number one event in which is an opportunity for people to start seeing this, alhamdulillah, working to the right direction, is Ramadan. Ramadan, when you have everybody coming in, make sure to pay attention to people that feel marginalized in the month of Ramadan, whether because of the color of their skin, or their background, or social status, or economic status, or maybe the language they speak, whatever that is. As a community, be more conscious of this and bring that to this awareness to everybody during the month of Ramadan, inshallah ta'ala. Wallahu a'lam.
Okay. Next question. What have you noticed is driving youth towards pornography, and what can we do about it?
Bismillah. I mean, part of what's driving youth to pornography is the easy access to it. That's the short and simple of it. There was a time when, when I grew up, when the only way you had access to it is if the first time I was even exposed to it is when I went to a college campus and I went to the bookstore, and there on the book racks are those filthy sort of material. Before that I had no, so the short and simple is that the access is there from, in everybody's pocket. And as soon as you put one of these in your kid's pocket, then you're inviting that potential into their life. So the question is, so that's why it's there. And human beings are curious by nature, and human beings are attracted generally to the opposite gender by nature. And if it's just a few clicks of a button, it's really that simple. The real question to ask is, how do we protect ourselves from this? How do we strengthen ourselves? How do we give ourselves fortitude so that we don't fall into that trap? That's where we really need to focus. And that's a question that each and every one of us needs to ask for ourselves, right? Each and every one of us needs to ask for ourselves. And the issue of pornography is the far end of the spectrum, but you have other spectrums too. You have PG, you have rated G, PG, PG-13, rated R, X, etc. As soon as you start letting your guard down and saying, at least I'm not watching this, at least I'm not exposing myself to this. One of Shaitan's favorite tricks is to say, at least you're not doing this. You're smoking weed, well, at least you're not doing something worse. You're only looking at stuff on your phone and images, but you're not doing these things in real life. So a person has to be very guarded with their life in terms of how they live their life, to ensure that they're not letting these, they don't have holes in their wall, in their fortress that they have up against Shaitan. So that's the real question. How do we fortify ourselves, and how do we strengthen ourselves so that we don't fall into these traps? And inshallah, that's also a longer discussion.
Anyone else want to?
One other thing is we have to understand that it's not really visual pornography, even music right now. Listening, I mean, there's everywhere. You listen, it's pornography right now. The kind of music that kids are listening to today, just awful and ugly. Watching it, subhanAllah, it's pornography. And it comes in different levels. There is soft pornography, even watching the TV these days. The jokes that they make sometimes, the remarks that they make sometimes, and even on politics as well too. So as a result, it's an overwhelmingly sexualized society. So people, they have access to it whether they like it or not. And just like the Sheikh mentioned, it's curiosity. People, they go and they have a look 1 or twice and 3 times, and the first few times it's very, very scary because it's a new experience for them, and after that it becomes addiction. So for parents, and my suggestion for parents really is, if you know that your child, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our children, Rabbil Alameen, is going through this, don't treat this just as a sin. I repeat, do not just treat this as a sin, like astaghfirullah, ittaqillah, haram, you're going to go to hell. Yeah, but before he goes to hell in the akhirah, he's going to go through hell in the dunya. And therefore, you have to understand it's not just a spiritual crisis, it is also an addiction. And that addiction doesn't matter whether it's drugs or addiction to pornography or gambling or whatever that is, it's becoming an addiction. You have to seek professional help. Well, we don't want to be embarrassed or feel ashamed. Well, then you're on your own. You're going to have to accept if my child's going through this crisis, then they're going through this crisis. Now, as an imam, I deal with a lot of people who are unfortunately going through crises like this. And I don't see the problems becoming only for those who are far away from the deen, yani. Even among good people. Wallahi, even among righteous people, let me say, not just good people, righteous people, this sin is becoming an epidemic and a problem. People, they get married and they're still attached to this problem, not because they believe their spouse is not worthy, it's because it's just being addiction. They're unable to get out of it. Like the Sahabi who was addicted to alcohol, and when he became Muslim, he's still drinking alcohol. And he was beaten a few times because of it. And one of the Sahaba one time, he said, قال قبحه الله ما أكثر ما يؤتى به في الخمر. Like, woe to him. How much they're going to keep bringing him? How many times they're still going to bring him for this? And the Prophet ﷺ, when he heard that curse, or that curse word at this Sahabi, he said, قالت لا تكونوا عون للشيطان على أخيكم. He says, don't say this. Don't assist the shaitan against your brother. فإنه يحب الله ورسوله, because he loves Allah and he loves the messenger. One of the Sahaba, he mentioned that in that moment when I heard the Prophet ﷺ saying that about him, he said, I wished to be in this position in that moment. Even though he was a drunken man, but the Prophet testified for his sincerity about the love for Allah and the messenger. So some people might be unfortunately get into troubles because of it, whether marital issues or personal issues, but it's not just a spiritual crisis, it's also an addiction that needs to be treated and dealt with professionally. Allah.
Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create unclear matters if He wants us to follow Him as much as possible? If a person follows, it's kind of a two-part question, if a person follows what they believe is right in a contradictory matter, but it's wrong in the eyes of Allah, would they be forgiven for trying their best?
So if I understand correctly, that question is sort of about the difference of opinion and why are there differences of opinion? Why doesn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a clear-cut answer? And I think one simple answer to that is, of course, obviously this is not only that this life is a test and that we're meant to seek out answers, but it's a recognition of the emphasis that Islam has on seeking knowledge. That you've got these differences of opinions, but here is your incentive to go out and learn more and seek knowledge. And of course, that difference being rahmah at the end of the day, being able to express those differences of opinion. And when it comes to differences of opinion, as long as it's falling under it follows certain guidelines, that difference of opinion is okay. I'm not sure what he meant by contradictory, but there's criteria that you have to meet. Obviously, being able to cite source texts from the Quran, the Sunnah, etc. And there's a paper actually on Yaqeen Institute that you can find that we actually talk about sort of those types of guidelines. But in terms of the difference of opinion, that's something that historically throughout Muslim civilization was something that was taken advantage of. So you have in Mamluk Empire with the Egyptians that they had a 4-qadiship system where you had 4 qudah, 4 judges from each madhab. And they took advantage of that sort of, what we would consider to be flexibility by, sending certain people would come to a Hanafi judge and they would want a divorce because their husband was missing for years. And the Ahnaf are extremely strict in this regard. And so they would recommend them, hey, why don't you go, you go to the Maliki judge who would then be able to have an easier process in terms of granting divorce. And so that was something that throughout history, amongst the Ottomans as well, you see time and time again that they took advantage of this system, and as long as it had fallen within what we would consider orthodoxy, then that would all be permissible in the sight of Allah, and really is a means of making our lives more productive in terms of encouraging us to seek knowledge, and also easier in that realm.
Our Prophet ﷺ, he said in the hadith that's related in Suhail Bukhari, Suhail Muslim, إن الحلال بين والحرام بين إن الحلال بين والحرام بين وبينهما أمور مشتبهات لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس. And the hadith continues, the Prophet ﷺ says that halal is clear and haram is clear, but there are in between them matters that are ambiguous, unclear, doubtful. The Prophet ﷺ, the point here is that the Prophet acknowledged that there are things that we may not have a clear text on. And there's no way that the Quran and Sunnah are going to speak to every single particular issue at every single point of time over the course of human history. But we have general guidelines, we have certain principles and understandings from which we derive, all of our rulings and so on and so forth. But again, the point being, the Prophet ﷺ, he acknowledged that there are these gray areas. Then he told us how to deal with those gray areas. وَمَنِ اتَّقَى الشُّبَهَاتِ فَقَدْ اسْتَبْرَأَ لِدِينِهِ وَعِرْضِهِ أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, that the one who stays away from those matters, he's careful about how he navigates those things, then they've kept their honor and they've kept their deen safe. So there is, this general concept, دَعْ مَا يُرِيبُكَ لِمَا لَا يُرِيبُكَ أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. The Prophet said, leave that which you are doubtful for that which you are not doubtful for. So there is kind of a general attitude in terms of how we do approach some things in our own lives if we don't have knowledge, if we don't have understanding of those. We do have access to resources to gain that understanding, but we should navigate those things very, very clearly. Ultimately, if somebody is doing something based upon knowledge, they studied the matter and then they've come to a conclusion based upon a proper means of seeking out an answer, then inshallah ta'ala they've done their best. They've done with that which is within their capacity, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will either reward them if they are right, and also potentially reward them even if they are wrong, as the Prophet ﷺ said, the one who makes ijtihad and he does it, and he comes to the right conclusion, they have two rewards. But that has to be conditioned on the fact that you went through these steps to come to that decision. Allah Alam.
Something quick about it?
Yes.
The question is hypothetical, just to be clear about it. Which means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already created this life and designed it in a way to have controversy. Why? As means of the test. So what the question requires is that everything should be certain. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not guarantee anything in this world. Otherwise there will be no meaning for the test. There is no meaning for this life. It will be in Jannah already. He said subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَقَالُوا لَوْلَا أُنزِلَ عَلَيْهِ مَلَكٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they claim, or they ask, why didn't he have an angel come with him? And Allah says, وَلَوْ أَنزَلْنَا مَلَكًا لَقُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ ثُمَّ لَا يُنظَرُونَ. If we send an angel to him, that's it. It will be done. And there will be no need for us to wait for them to the end of time. Yani. Like basically, if we've sent them the certainty already, there is no need for a test, and there will be no need for them to wait until the end of time. So that's part of the test. Wallahu a'lam.
What is the Islamic perspective on female genital mutilation?
From a perspective or from
The Islamic perspective.
Okay, so it's basically, it was a culture that was practiced in many places before Islam, and particularly in the Arabian Peninsula, wasn't very common. Many people misconstrue that. They think it was very common in the Arabian Peninsula. It was not. As a matter of fact, it was imported from Africa, and that's why the Sahabiya that came to the Prophet ﷺ in Medina, she was asking, Ya Rasulullah, I'm doing this, so what do you think about it? Because now she realized, okay, so that's not very common, so let me just ask the Prophet ﷺ if that's something that is okay. And since it's considered cultural, the Prophet ﷺ, he left it for them. He says, if you're going to have to do that, but just don't be excessive. Like it's part of your culture. Now, today here in America, it's considered something against the law, and obviously there is no need to practice that. Don't tell me this is wajib or mustahab or this and that. If it's against the law and it's not an obligation on you as a Muslim to practice that, then stay away from it. That's not unacceptable. Allahu a'lam. No. And by the way, in some cultures they still practice this, but if they do it in a wrong way, it's considered haram. Not just acceptable in their culture. It becomes haram to do that if they're doing it as a form of abuse. Wallahu a'lam.
Why is there suffering in the world? Why can't life be easier?
That requires a lecture and beyond. So that's a big question. That's a big question.
Can I just give a quick answer on this? So, quick answer on this. This question is only proof to us that we're humans. What does that mean? Because as humans, we only see things in contrast with each other. You only recognize hate because you know what love is. You recognize good because you see what evil is. You recognize darkness because there is light. And you only ask about suffering because you recognize there is what? There's comfort. But we only focus on the negative right now. And that again goes back to the same concept, which is everything is part of the test that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing us. So why there has to be suffering? Because if there is no suffering, there is no test. And if you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this as a mean of test, then we're already here. When the Sahaba, they asked the Prophet ﷺ about the same concept, which is فَفِيمَ الْعَمَلِ, why bother then if everything has been written? The Prophet ﷺ says, اِعْمَلُوا فَكُلُّ مُيَسَّرٌ لِمَا خُلِقَ لَهُ. Like, listen, this question is irrelevant now. You're already being created. Just do the right thing and do it right. That's all. Wallahu a'lam.
What do I do when I'm having to make a decision between putting in time to go to a prestigious university versus putting my time in for spiritual practices? Would this require a sacrifice on either side?
So balancing schoolwork and sort of your spiritual life. One thing that I'm always telling my friends and family is it's all about time management at the end of the day. If you can manage your time well, there's nothing you have to sacrifice. And what I mean by time management, it's not, oh, I'm just going to keep track of my time, I'm going to plan things. No, I mean you're planning your day to day, your minute to minute. So when I wake up, I have 6 a.m. to 6:30, I'm going to be doing this. So from 6:30 to 8 a.m., I'm going to be doing this. And there's a whole process behind it. There's plenty of books written on it. It changed my life. You recognize how much time you lose when you start doing that, because then once you have every minute of your day planned and you're going back to back to back, and you schedule in breaks in between, by the way, you got a 15-minute break, but then you realize how much time you just spend scrolling on your phone. You realize how much time you spend putzing around your house or doing things that are unnecessary. And until you hold yourself accountable and until you have every hour of the day scheduled, you realize there's so much time in your day. And then you find a way to be able to balance. And then obviously there's, of course, you've got your spiritual aspect and realm, and you've got social, your school and work, but of course there's also a huge social aspect that comes into play. And that's something that I learned in college, that I decided that if I was serious about my spirituality, if I was serious about my education, that a lot of my social life had to be cut back, and not entirely deteriorated, but I knew that there were some things that I told my friends, no, you have to learn how to say no. You turn down events, you turn down things to do. You have your time with your friends, you have your time with your family, you enjoy it. But once it becomes excessive, then that's something that you need to learn how to prioritize if that is your end goal in terms of spirituality. But my biggest recommendation, I'm sure the Mashaykh have great recommendations, but in terms of being able to keep track of your time and use it in the best way, I promise you that can change your life.
Is it okay to have intercourse after Katab al-Kitab and before the cultural wedding / nikah?
Okay. So the question is basically, if young man and woman, they got their nikah done, Katab al-Kitab done right now, and the family, they decided to defer the wedding at certain later time. Let's say they had their nikah in spring, and they're planning the wedding after Ramadan in the summer. Is it permissible for the young man and woman to have intercourse because now they're officially husband and wife before that time? The answer is actually, Islamically speaking, from that perspective, is yes, they are allowed to do that because they're husband and wife. However, I discourage them from doing this. Again, Islamically speaking, they're husband and wife. But I discourage them from doing this. Because if you're going to do this, why wait until the summer then? Just do a quick wedding and that's it. Because whatever you're waiting for, it's going to be just unnecessary expenses. Just do your wedding and that's it. Officially move in together. But if you say, well, we're not ready yet, I'm still in school, she's still in school, then why on earth are you doing this now? Wait until they're done. And obviously, what if there is a workout and then they divorce? Would that be something shameful? No, it's not. Because again, they did that in a halal way. They were husband and wife. But I do not encourage young men, I don't encourage them to do so. They need to wait to fulfill their also social and cultural obligation in regards to this matter. Again, it's not haram, but I would discourage them from doing that. Now, the ulama, the opposite, they define الدخول, consummation in different ways, because it has legal ramification as well too. Because once they have their consummation, that means that the mahar becomes due. They have to actually fulfill the mahar. Also, she has the right to demand that she lives with him. Let's say if they consummate the marriage, and then she said, "Hey, I want to move with you. I want to move in with you." Well, I'm not ready yet. So why did you then do that for? She has the right to ask for this, and she has the right to ask for nafaqa, to spend on her as well too, because they consummated the marriage. There are a lot of actual rulings for this. So it's not just to enjoy the pleasure of being together and then run away from the responsibilities of doing so. But then what does define consummation? The ulama, they have difference of opinion. All of them agree that the actual physical intercourse considered dukhul, considered consummation. They agree to this. But then the Hanafis, they say that any physical interaction between the man and woman in a manner that's less than intercourse, meaning physical interaction, kissing and hugging and so on, so it also counts as consummation. But the vast majority of the fuqaha, in order to avoid all kind of controversy, they say if the man and woman, they went into perfect khalwa, which means being alone together behind closed doors, for whatever time that they assume to be, they say that officially considered consummation, even if there was no intercourse between them. Why? Because we have to assume it happened. Wallahu a'lam.
Should I play hard to get with my wife so that she appreciates me more?
Good luck with that.
I'll just say in my line of work, if you have to play games, there's always a winner and a loser in every game. And inshallah, Sunday we'll talk more about this. The family track with Sheikh Yasin, inshallah. Since khamr in Arabic, we got a lot of questions, by the way, about khamr and with, whether it's, is rice wine vinegar haram or is animal shortening, or, what about if it's been fermented? So if you could talk briefly about just khamr in general, technically and linguistically refers to fermented products. What's the fiqhi ruling regarding things where alcohol is perhaps cooked out of ingredients or cooked out of meats, or in products like kimchi or other things like that?
No. So the discussion is about a fiqh principle called al-istihala. Al-istihala is when a chemical product or a natural product goes into certain processing, natural or chemical, that turns this product into a new product completely. Like, for example, the actual origin of vinegar is wine, and if you leave the wine long enough, it will transfer from being wine to being vinegar. So ferment completely. It takes a while, obviously, but eventually will end up becoming vinegar. So is it allowed for us to use that vinegar? The answer is yes. That's something the ulama all agree on, no doubt about it. But the problem in our time is the istihala, that transformation from the original state to the new state right now. Is that considered complete or not? Based on what? Has there been any human interference or not in the process? So the ulama, they argue if human interference invalidates the process or keeps the process okay, as long as the new product is also completely chemically different. The conservative opinion, they say that if there's any human interference, it would invalidate the process. So therefore, they don't consider the new product to be halal. Like, for example, when you go to the vinegar section, you'll find white wine vinegar, red wine vinegar, rice vinegar, for example, wine vinegar. But then they have a statement that says naturally aged or naturally occurring sulfur, for example, versus added, the word added. If something was added, that means there is human interference here to speed up the process of change. But if there was nothing added, it would be natural actual transformation from chemical to chemical product. So the conservative opinion, the ulama, they say if there was any human interference, then it's not pure, which means the gelatin as well is another problem. Because the transformation is the same thing too. If there's human interference to speed up the process, that means it's not 100% halal, and that's why whether the origin is actually pork or Beef gelatin, it's the same. If you don't eat except for the biha when it comes to beef gelatin, for example. But the ulama who say that the full transformation is complete regardless whether it's with human interference or otherwise, even if it was pork actually product, if it changes into gelatin, which means a complete different chemical, then it's fine. There's nothing wrong with using it because it's no longer considered pork product anymore. It's a whole different chemical ingredient or product. So this is actually where the argument, the ulama, they have difference of opinion over when to use it, when you avoid it. I'm kind of on the conservative side of things in regard to these issues. So therefore, if the transformation was full, naturally, then it's halal regardless what product it is originally. Otherwise, I would stay away from it. Wallahu alam.
My child wants to have a pet dog. Is it permissible in Islam to have a dog in the house?
Well, you can get them actually, I think 2 for $5 in Walmart, inshallah ta'ala. But they're stuffed dogs, obviously. Actually, do we own a dog in the house? Well, if you want to have a dog, the only hadith in Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is very clear. If you have a dog in the house, that means the angels were not going to be there. So the choice is yours. However, there are exceptions for allowing to have own dogs. Whether it's for guarding dog, for example, shepherd dog, or service dog. In the past, obviously, people's houses were different sections. So the dog stays outside. The dog stays outside, which means, it's outside, whether in the backyard or front yard. Does it come into the house? It does come into the house, but they show it out. They leave it out. So if you have a backyard, if you have a ranch, if you have something like this, you would like to own a dog, go for it. No problem with that. But people, they want to have dogs as pets in the house, just to play with them and so on. If it wasn't a service dog, whether it's for hearing, for example, or seizure, or even if it was prescribed by a doctor for comfort, for example, then they shouldn't be actually staying in the house. Should not be staying in the house. That's my opinion on this matter, on this mas'ala, on this issue. But there's another thing right now. What if you're in the park and there are dogs running around, okay? Is it permissible to touch the dog and pet the dog and play with the dog? I know we grew up in a culture that demonize dogs to the extent of just saying, don't touch the dog, don't let the dog touch you, because if it touches you, you're going to have to wash up, 100 times. No, ya Jama'ah. It's okay to pet the dog. It's okay to play with the dog. But after you're done, go and wash your hands and we're done. And if any of its saliva came on your body, the same thing. Wash it and that's it. Do you have to wash it 7 times? No, that's just for the utensils. But your shoes, your clothes, your body, it doesn't have to be 7 times. Just wash your hand and that's it. You're done, inshallah ta'ala. Wallahu a'lam.
On the issue of emotional support animals, right? It's becoming a very common thing. Actually, on the flight over here from Los Angeles, I was shocked by the number of animals on the plane. And I know the reason why that is. Because I work, once in a while people come to us and ask us to issue those letters for them through the work that I do at the Khalil Center. It's a very loose criteria. And it's a very almost non-existent criteria. And it's almost a matter of just a little bit of money and very little bit of establishing substantiating whatever reasons you have to actually get one of those emotional support animals. So by the way, as emotional support animal, you can get a cat, you can get a rabbit, or whatever else you want, a turtle, a fish, whatever makes you happy. But the issue of the dog still remains the same, as the Sheikh said, in terms of entering into the house, according to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. But I just wanted to make that clarification on this, on the emotional support animals. It's almost an overwhelming thing, and it's overwhelming a lot of different spaces that, like in a way, it didn't do before. And so Muslims shouldn't just fall لا يكن أحدكم عماء, as the Prophet says. We don't just follow every single trend that comes along and go along with it without thinking about the logical end and consequence for our deen and our dunya.
How can we, and they specify youth, but how can we as youth bring people of diverse ethnicities and nations into leadership roles, aka in young Muslims or in MSAs or in Masajid youth organizations? How do we open up spaces to others?
Bismillah. Having worked in different Muslim organizations, we live, unfortunately, there is a kind of overwhelmed culture of people not willing to let go of position, whether that be in masajid or other Muslim institutions. And that culture has to change, that culture has to absolutely change, especially given the fact and considering the reality that we live in a very fast-changing world. We live in a very, very fast-paced, changing world. The trends of yesterday are very different than the trends of today, and we're not going to be able to speak to our communities in the way we need to and reach young people, old people, and everybody in between. So now when you talk about youth, who is youth? What does that mean? There's multiple layers and there's multiple sections of who that is and what that means. Sheikh earlier said, I'll give it over to the young people on this side. The Sheikh is calling me a young person, but I am very different than some of you guys in the audience. I don't understand the language my kids talk. And they're teenagers. I'm born and raised here, and I've been part of different cultures and different communities. I speak Ebonics and Spanglish and many other languages. So I understand, but I don't understand the language of young people today. So the reality is that we need to open up space if we want to be true to our responsibility as giving da'wah in the way in which it should be given. So masajid organizations, they need to absolutely have at least as a quota system, at least as a quota system, a position or two on the board. There needs to be a liaison between the older folks in the community and the younger folks. When you have a large masjid, there needs to be an imam who is able to speak to the older generation and an imam that is able to reach the younger generation. So those are considerations that we can't take for granted any longer.
We're gonna wrap it up, inshallah. Just one more question over here. How can I deal with my parents when they try to convert me and my children to a different lifestyle or a different, in this case they specify to Shiaism, and continuously mention Shia beliefs and practices whenever we see them?
Bismillah. Well, this is going to be their test, yani Allah musta'an. The test that you're dealing with right now is that your parents, they try that, to the best of their abilities. And of course, in this case, when you go home, you teach your children what is right, and you let them know that your parents, they have their own, belief system and so forth. You just show them respect, but we don't have to follow what they're saying. Again, that's going to be a test that they're going to have to deal with, and they have to, like we said, as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in the hadith, لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. If they are asking you to do things that are not appropriate in your belief system, in this case, you just don't obey them. And just show them respect and love, inshallah ta'ala. Wallahu a'lam.
All right, Jazakumullah khair. We have a lot of questions, obviously. There's a lot of overlap.